Does your dog or cat know what you're saying when you talk to them? Do they look at you and then do they kind of turn their head sideways as if to say, "What the heck do you want this time?" Now, I know for sure my dog Mabel, when I'm talking to her, yes, I talk to her all the time, she just looks at me, and if I could read her mind, I guarantee she's saying something like, "Here he goes again." But really, what if we could really tell if our pets knew what we were saying? In today's episode, Marianna Boros and Lliya Magyari, they join me. They're co-authors in a recently published paper conducted in Budapest, Hungary. And this study was all based on the communication in dogs. Now you may ask, how can you tell what they actually understand? Well, let's think about this. Let's try this one. Ask a dog to sit still for an hour, measure their brain activity with an EEG when we're communicating with them. Guess what? They did exactly that. Now, visualize it kind of. I'm thinking something like a lie detector. The amazing thing is, though, the results they found, dogs understand way more than what was thought. Now, here's a side note, and I know this one. Our dogs totally understand what we say, right? I know mine do. Now, the study's been published worldwide, and the possibilities are endless. Did you know that dogs immediately know what we mean when we're actually pointing? Now, I want you to think about primates. Now, we always hear they're our closest cousins, right? But do you know they actually have to be taught what pointing means? Now, I can't wait for you to meet these amazing women and what they've discovered and what more this is leading to. Lastly, I want you to pay attention to this. Be really careful what you're saying around your pets. They may just be listening. We are supported by PrepVet, providing stem cell therapy for pets.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange, losses and gains, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the For Real Podcast. Today, I've got two wonderful guests. I want to introduce you to both of them. I have two people that have become good friends of mine, and there's a story behind that I'm not going to get into. So, Marianna Boros and Lliya Magyari. I'm so sorry. I keep screwing up on the name. Hey, guys, welcome to being here. One of you guys are in Hungary. One is in Norway. We're going to talk about dog communication. But first of all, thanks so much for taking time to do this.
Thanks for the invitation. Welcome, everyone.
Yes.
Yeah, well, so let's dig into this. First off, let's start at the beginning, how you got started doing the dog communication. I know your study is now gone all over the world, but whoever wants to start first, Marianna or Lliya. Actually, Lliya, why don't you start first, and let's talk about how you got started in the project, what you're doing. I know you're both, way smarter than me for a lot of reasons, and let's just go from there.
Okay. Hi, and welcome to everyone. So yes, I am Lliya Magyari, and I am at the moment. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, and I am working at University of Stavanger in Norway. But the study was done in Budapest at the Ethology Department of Eotvos University, and we started to have this idea for the project while I was still working there in Budapest, Hungary. And my interest in dog communication is basically coming from an interest in being interested in human language, which maybe sounds a bit strange. Why do we study the dogs then? But actually, looking at what type of abilities animals have to understand human language could reveal a lot about how how the ability for humans to communicate in the way how they communicate evolved through the evolutionary history. Because in general, it is very like human communication and using language is a very different system than what how animals communicate. So therefore, it is very interesting to try to figure out how this ability could evolve.
Well, one of the things, when I was reading your guys' study, was one of the things you're doing is because humans communicate. It's a complex communication, and actually, it makes a lot of sense because I'll actually, Marianna, why don't you talk about that? I read it, but you guys can probably speak to it better than me because of the coexisting between, dogs have been around forever, kind of hanging with humans when they became domesticated. But let's just go with your background and let me keep my mouth shut for a bit and see what happens.
Well, thank you. So I'm also a cognitive neuroscientist. I'm a postdoc researcher at the Neuroethology of Communication Lab at the Alta University in Budapest, Hungary. And this lab is actually part of the Department of Ethology that has been studying social cognition in dogs for already almost, I think, more than 20 years. This department was a pioneer in including dogs into comparative research because dogs have been by comparative researchers have been looked at as a kind of an artificial species who is not really interesting for many reasons, and this department has sort of changed this attitude towards dogs in terms like scientific attitude and said that the the reason why dogs are particularly interesting for comparative research is that they have been selected during their domestication. They have been selected for cooperation and communication with humans. And nowadays, when it comes to language research and speech perception research, it is even more interesting because dogs are living immersed in the human cultural and linguistic environment. So dogs are surrounded by speech all the time, naturally surrounded by speech. So they hear us talking to them. Like some of the owners talk more to the dogs, some of the other owners talk less. But nevertheless, many of our communication to the dogs, towards the dog, is via the speech signal. So speech is not only familiar to the dogs, but also very relevant. And this is why dogs are very different from other species that used to be studied by comparative scientists, such as apes, because those apes who can be studied are usually kept in laboratories, and they have, even if they hear speech, this is not their primary interest as for a communication signal. So dogs are very particular in this regard, and this is why we decided to study dogs and to study what is happening in the. Actually, we also have this great opportunity that there is this know-how in this laboratory to study what is happening in the dog's brain while they are hearing speech. And so one of the pioneering of this know-how is Lliya, who developed the methodology for ERP studies, and she will probably tell more about this later.
Oh, absolutely. So, a couple of things I wanted to ask. One of the things I read was about pointing, like dogs understand a point. If I point to a dog and say, go there or whatever, whereas, talking about what we were just saying about the apes don't really pay attention. They actually have to be trained what that pointing is, which I thought was really fascinating because you always assume everybody talks to they're so much closer to humans, but actually they're being trained. They're not actually listening.
Yes, so this is part of this of this social cognition research and comparative research that we are also that I talked about. Like dogs are quite good at naturally following both pointing and gazing, human gazing. And this is, if you think about it, like dogs are much more dependent on humans than any other species. So I don't know if this, as you said earlier, this is like a redoing of our previous discussion. So I don't know if I said it before or not, but I will just repeat that dogs have been demonstrated to be attached to their human caregiver, and so they show all this spectrum of the attachment behavior that normally a human infant would show toward their mother. And this is the same, it has been demonstrated both behaviorally and also in terms of brain mechanisms. There are similar brain mechanisms in the dog's brain that are activated, that are demonstrating their attachment to their human caregiver, as we see in human infants. And this is, for the moment, we think that this is only present on an interspecific level. This is only present in dogs. So it makes sense that they would follow pointing, that they would pay much more attention to their human caregiver. And this is also why we are studying how they perceive speech and communication, because this is very important for them.
As I'm sitting here thinking, even though we've talked before, the more I think about it, I think about how dogs do rely on us so much and they get so excited when we get home and all that. One question I have for you is, I've noticed, and especially when I'm doing this podcast and I'm being more aware of things, especially in the animal world, is that there's been an evolution, I think, with humans, and I mean, even more so now with dogs, because they're just family members. And even culturally, if you talk to different countries, some countries don't treat dogs the same, but they're progressing more and more where these dogs are becoming part of the family. So do you think that also helps affect the study that you're doing?
It was definitely an important factor that actually the dogs who we are studying are pet dogs, like family dogs.
Right.
So it means that they actually are exposed to the same language environment as a human baby. But of course, it's still a question whether do we communicate in the same way with dogs than with babies. And it might be not necessarily, because we don't assume that they would understand us that much.
Right.
So there are also differences, but absolutely there are also very much similarities as well.
So let's talk about your study. And I think you guys are the first ones that really do the EEG. So let's talk about, one, how many dogs you had, and let's walk through the beginning, how it got set up, what you do, and where you're going.
Okay, so first about this technique, I could say a bit, and then Marianna could tell us about the actual experimental setup.
Okay.
So so there has been a long tradition of doing electrophysiology with animals. So we are not pioneering in that one, but there was no, or at least at our lab, and that actually not, we don't know of any other lab which would have done before we started electrophysiological measurement absolutely non-invasively. So we just put glue electrodes on the surface of the head of the dogs, which measures electric brain activity. We don't use any needle or whatever. So which would be non-invasive, and which would be during the dog is awake. And also we don't give, of course, any medication, or there are no any restrictions on the movements of the dogs. Because there have been, of course, animal experiments where they either used needles or where they give certain, even some medication which would relax the dogs or whatever. We, of course, didn't want it to do that. And there was already kind of a tradition in the lab where they did measure EEG activity of dogs while they were sleeping. Because that's kind of easy, because then the dogs don't move.
Right.
And there was lots of doubts when we started this road, like whether we can actually convince the dogs to stay motionless while we are measuring their brain activity. Because for this technique, it is it is very important that that we measure the brain activity and not muscle activity, because the muscles are also causing tiny electric changes on the head surface, or even much bigger than what the brain activity is causing. So if the dog is moving, even just blinking, then we can see less the brain activity itself.
As I sit here and my legs are bouncing up and down as I do all the time, I can't imagine any dog sitting for any length of time without moving because I can't even do it.
So, and there has been also a very like pioneering research at the lab doing fMRI with dogs, which is I don't know if you know about this. This is this kind of tube, like a big magnet. It's a tube in which usually it is done with humans. Humans lie in, and these nice pictures. They can make nice images about the brain while someone is doing certain tasks. And they could train dogs as well to stay in this tube, but that took at least half year of or at least months of training. And we also figured that for EEG, it is not really good if we train them to lie down, because then they are still in this task of, I am just lying down in order to get the treats
Great.
or whatever. So they would actually still, although they would be motionless, they might still use their muscles and they would be still very alert.
Right.
So what we started to do is actually we explained to the owners. We have to rely a lot, of course, on the owners here to help us to create the situation where we can actually do this type of measurement with the dogs. And we explained to the owners that just here is a mat in the lab, a mattress. Just sit there and have your dog next to you, like it would be like a lazy Sunday afternoon. And then we are kind of just putting some electrodes on the dog's head, and then let's have this relaxed position. And in the first experiments, we were just playing auditory stimuli. So the dogs were just actually listening to words through speakers. And in this study, which we are speaking about, it was kind of a much more complicated setup. But Marianna will tell that.
Marianna, walk us through the test.
So it seems that most of the dogs are good at learning simple instruction words. So most owners will know that they can easily teach their pooch to sit down, to stay, etc., etc.
Right.
But most dogs have but it seems that learning object names, so toy names for example, is much more difficult for a dog. There are some very exceptional dogs who are very good at this, but most like typical family dogs, like pet dogs, are at random when they are tested, or seems to be like on the individual level at random. So what we wanted to see here is that whether it is the task that causes difficulty. So most of the time this is tested by fetching an object that is asked by the owner.
Mhm.
So whether it is the test or it is really like the fact that dogs don't understand. So because, as I said, it seems that dogs have this difficulty with learning object names. We already had difficulty finding the right dogs for our experiment, but we managed to find to test 27 dogs. So our requirement was that the owner claims that their dog knows at least 3 object names. These were most of the time toy names, but sometimes it was a leash or a collar, muzzle. But as I said, most of the time it was like ball, frisbee, Kong, etc. And we asked the owners to come with the toys to the lab. In total, we asked for 5 toys, 5 objects, visually equally known to the dogs. So a bit of technical details. So the dog sat on the mat, and the dog was separated this time from the owner by a panel, like a green panel that had a hole in the middle. And this hole was actually an electrical window that could be turned transparent or opaque by button press. And this is important for like precisely logging the moment of object presentation. And so what we did is we pre-recorded the owner's voice.
Let's set this up a little bit. So, the only reason I'm doing this is because we talked about this before. So, you've got, I just want people so they can visualize. You've got a room with a panel that's got a window that gets cloudy and not cloudy, opaque,
Yes,
so
yes.
they can see them. And then the dog is sitting how far away? And then they also have another owner that's sitting next to the dog, right?
Yes, yes. So the dog was lying like, I would say, like half meter away from the window, so quite close,
Oh,
so that it can see well what is happening. And we most of the time we ask the owners to come in pairs, and whenever it was not possible, then there was another experimenter present to sit with the dog, so that whenever it becomes like restless or wants to get up,
sure.
there is someone with the dog, and it just doesn't run away with the electrodes on its head. So the dog was lying on a mat, and the experimenter owner, so we had to train one of the owners to become an experimenter, was sitting on the other side of the panel. And so we displayed his or her voice through loudspeakers, and then when the window turned transparent, the owner had to show up a toy, and this toy was either matching what the dog heard before, or what it could mismatch the word as well. So the what the dog was hearing, like, Zara, look, the ball, and then the owner either shows up the ball or shows up a different object. And so we were expecting that if the dogs understand the word, if they connect the word to the memory of that object, then we will see, when then the dog will have an expectation as to what it is going to see. And when we violate this expectation, so we show up a different object, that we will see it in the brain responses of the dogs. And this is what happened.
And we had mentioned this at one point. It's kind of like the way I visualize is a lie detector when you see in the movies, right? They've got the stuff in their head, and the guy's measuring to see how the thing jumps up and down, right?
Yes and no. So, Lila, go ahead.
Yes. So actually, we cannot. So it's a very noisy data what we are measuring,
Okay,
and so we cannot really see by eyes that. Oh, now I see that the dog noticed that this is the same object what was mentioned before. Oh, or the dog now noticed that it is a different object. But rather, what we do is that we present these objects and words many times to the dog and to many dogs, and then we look at all of the data, we average them, and then we can see that actually there is a different the brain activity, like you can imagine like a brain wave
sure.
in time, like from object presentation, during 1 second from object presentation, the lines are differ at some point after the object presentation, if the word was matching, and if the word was mismatching the object what the dogs saw. So we can make conclusions not about the individual, less about the individual dogs or about the individual trials, but when we have all of this data together, then we can see what happened.
So I guess one of the things to think about. So what you're testing is cognition through communication by saying, "Is this a ball?" And if I'm holding up a frisbee, they respond thinking in their head, that's not a ball, it's a frisbee. What are they saying?" Kind of a thing. But it's not saying that they can actually speak to you. It's saying that they can communicate by understanding communication. Is that what we're doing?
It's a very good question, actually.
Yes, but definitely we are right now, we what we are measuring is passive understanding, or like reception of human communication. But one of our colleagues has just received here at the lab, our Tamás Farago. He just received a huge grant, from the European Union, to study how dogs can actually modulate their vocalization. So, are they good vocal learners? So, this is also a very interesting question, and so we know that obviously songbirds are very good vocal learners, but it
Sure.
seems that dogs might also be able to modulate their vocalization. So maybe in a few years we will have an answer to that question as well.
Well, I mean, if you're a dog owner, I mean, and I know you are because your dog was crawling around the floor like mine was.
Yes.
So dogs do communicate, and they have different barks in that. I can't imagine that once you start doing that study, they do figure out how to say something to you.
Yeah, actually, so the colleague that I just mentioned, he has some studies on whether, for example, whether humans can differentiate if a bark is coming from a small dog or a big dog, or whether there are different growls recorded in different contexts, and so it seems that yes, these kind of contexts can be inferred from dog communication by other dogs and even by humans. So yes, this has to be looked into more in details.
But of course, I don't know if your question also was about a little bit about that we are here measuring brain activity, right? So we are not
Right.
measuring conscious thought of, but sorry, maybe my pronunciation is very bad of that word, but conscious thinking.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm just thinking, I'm trying to communicate differently.
Yeah, so I think it's still a question, and of course this is one of the biggest mysteries: what animals are really thinking and what they are aware of as well. So what we know now is that there is a capacity that their brain differentiate these two situations. But I think that's the next step. How much actually it is something that they actually also realize, and even a third step whether they can also communicate this.
So one of the things because your background is human communication. So one of the things that's interesting is figuring out how humans evolved to where we are now in communication by speaking in that. Since this is kind of early stages, I'm sitting here thinking, wow, I wonder if we're gonna with the guy, your friend that's doing the other study now, by doing this, even though you're talking about humans, are we going to figure out at some point that we can teach these animals actually to really communicate by sound as well as understanding words and that it kind of makes me think more about more things.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that comes to my head at this point are those, communication buttons that are like very popular now on social media, and so I mean, this is obviously always questionable what is really happening and what is the owner uploading to their platforms. But I know that there is also some rigorous research looking into it in the United States. So yeah, I think with all these, I think these new technologies helps us a lot in understanding and studying and going beyond behavior. So yes, we just have to like the listeners have to be tuned in and see what other research will bring us to the future in the future.
But I think it's still first we also have to think about this kind of there is a contradiction here in the sense that while we show that even dogs who are not actually very good in uh, bringing us objects when we name it, like showing behaviorally this,
Sure.
they actually still can differentiate these situations where when the name of the object matching or mismatching the presented object. So I think we also have to figure out why the dogs why the dogs doesn't show this behaviorally actually, or like typical dogs, and what is different in dogs who actually can do this.
Yes.
Well, what's happening? You've opened up this big door of all these other things you got to think about now, which is cool.
Yeah, and if I may just add to this, I mean, there might be a myriad of reasons why, but if you just think about it, like dogs, for a very long time, they have been selected for specific functions, and they had like a role in the human society, and it's just recent that they have become pets and family members, and they are really living in our cultural environment. So what I am thinking sometimes is that maybe this will also change in the future when not, like now a dog can have as many toys as a human
or
baby, but
more.
it wasn't like this even 50 years ago. So this is also a change in their environment, and we will see how this will affect their abilities and capacities. So this is actually also an important thing that we will want to look in the future, look into in the future, like how these capacity, like now we are showing what capacities are there in dogs, but how those capacities emerged are questions for future research.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think about what's going on now. Aside from people in their homes, people are bringing their dogs on airplanes all the time now. They're basically becoming humans in a weird sort. We're not humans, let's say partners in crime. They're on planes now. I mean, that's why the airlines are starting to limit it. I mean, everybody's starting to do all these other things with these animals, which is crazy.
Yeah.
So I want to ask a couple more questions about. So one, how long have you guys actually been doing the study? I know you published it. Are you still doing this, or where's all that at?
So we started testing for this study, I think started during the pandemic. So that was also a bit of difficulty because not everyone was happy to come to the lab. And so this particular test took a little bit longer than usually it takes for the tests.
Mhm.
Also, as I said, dogs were separated from their owners during the testing, and they had to be, so as Lila said earlier, dogs in just plain auditory studies, they just lie on their mat, but in this study they had to be attentive to the object that we were showing, so it was a bit more difficult than usual experiments. So some of the dogs had to come back for more tests. It is also important to mention that each dog is tested as long as they are happy to be tested. So whenever we see that they are getting tired, that they want to leave, we just stop the experiment. And so there is always one of the owners is always there. It is always, like watching the dog and monitoring its state. And so whenever they say that we should stop, we stop. The dog is never forced to do anything. And then we always ended up with a play session, so that if the owner is happy to come back, then the dog is always also like remembering that, okay, at the end I was able to play with my toys, and so literally they are coming to the lab like wagging their tails and pulling on the leash that I want to get in there. So this is why it took long, because some of the dogs were tested like 9 times. Other dogs just, owners after one occasion said, okay, thank you, fine, we will not coming back. But really we are really putting a lot of emphasis so that it's a positive experience for both the dog and the dog owner. But yeah, as I said, it took over, I think, 2 years to collect all the data. So this was exceptional in that sense.
And it was also like the preparation time was also longer, because Marianna did a great job in figuring out how we could present the objects in a way that the dog would actually attend to it. Because we used actually a setup which has been, or not used, but we were inspired by an experiment which has been done by infants. And in that study, they presented images of objects on the screen, on a computer screen. But that I think, Mariana, you can also tell it that you also tried a screen, right? But many of the dogs
Yes,
didn't pay attention to it.
they didn't pay attention to it. They just, after a while, they just turned their head and not interested.
Well, it's boring. And again, I'm listening to you guys and thinking, right? Because a rare moment for me, but I'm not a neuroscientist like you guys. But what I was thinking is, you're almost simulating. I don't know what they call it over in Hungary, but here, when kids first go to school, it's called either preschool, which is before they start grade one. And so you're almost giving them a classroom environment, because kids get bored too. So you have to figure out that. And then you know what they do? They go outside and they play.
Yes.
It's very similar.
And there is a lot of psychology involved as well in doing experiments with dogs, like just the same as when you invite infants into the lab.
Yeah, exactly.
Already you have to first have a good connection to the owners, then because then the dog will also better accept you, and it's very interesting dynamics I found. Yeah.
I talk about this in the podcast all the time. The more I do this and the more I talk to people like yourselves, they're doing all these really interesting things and how they're working with animals. The similarities between humans and dogs in particular, it's pretty amazing when you really dig into it. They have the same diseases we have, but you're doing experiments. Really, I know it's a different kind of environment, but it's very similar to, I would say, preschool for little children. Very similar. Except when my kids went to school, they didn't put any wires on their heads or anything like that. Although they probably should have on my son. But anyways, so what's next? You guys are thinking all over the place. So what do you want to do next? I know are you still doing it, or are you on to working more, taking this another step further?
So data collection for this experiment is over, but obviously it raises a lot of questions. So one of the questions I have for the moment, and then Lila will have many others, is that what we did in this study is we actually did the study with the dog's own toys, and so we know that in humans. So I think what we didn't mention or didn't explain well yet is that in humans, what we believe that understanding a word means that we don't infer the meaning of the word from the context or from things that are at hand, but we have a so-called, it is called in psychology, a mental representation, a concept that we link the word to. So we can talk about things that are present, but also about things that are not there, or even things that don't exist. And so this activation of this mental representation is what is so exciting, and we believe that we were able to demonstrate it in this experiment by first presenting the word and then having a delay before showing the object. So that was kind of for us, we interpreted that the dog could have this mismatch experience only because it activated this mental representation. But we know that the human concepts are very general. So when I say ball, I think about balls in general and not just my own ball.
Right.
But we could not test this because most dogs that we tested had like one example of this ball. But it would be super interesting to do the study with more generalized objects. So when the owner said where's the ball, and we show a different ball, whether we will see this same mismatch reaction or not. So this is my kind of idea for a follow-up study, but then Lila probably has more.
I love the idea because I'm sitting there thinking, because you have all these different kinds of balls. They're used to knowing what their ball is because they play with it or whatever. Now you have a different ball that's, one's a white tennis ball, one's a yellow tennis ball. Are they going to think that's a ball, or are they just going to think that's the thing I go to? That's cool. I love that.
Yep. Yeah. So we also we know from these so-called gifted word learner dogs, those dogs who are really having a object vocabulary of hundreds of toys, that they do generalize and they do form categories. So yeah, it would be really interesting to test. But I know that Lila has some more ideas on social cognition as well.
Sure.
Yeah. So my question is because so some scientists, language scientists, and also philosophers say that in human language, the very important aspect of human language, that we also understand that someone wants to communicate with us, like has an intention to
Sure.
give us some information. And I would be very interested in how whether dogs also have this type of notion of communication, that they are communicated to in this situation. which sounds like, of course, they you would think, oh, of course they understand it, but I think it's very difficult to show this empirically, that that they really recognize the intention of communication
Yeah.
from the human's part.
Well, I'm just thinking of my two dogs. One dog that I've had longer than another, man, she knows exactly what. If I'm saying something, she'll look at me or look at me like, okay, well, are you going to give me that or not? I want to see that. I can see her thinking that. Of course, I'm assuming, but I'll bet you the more you dig into this, the more you realize that they can communicate. But I think going back to what you said early was some of the dogs that just look at it and say, I'm just not going to do that because they're not interested. So figuring out why they're not interested, even though they know what it is also part of that, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I just love this. I don't know if you guys looked at, but I did an episode, and I'm sure you're familiar with it because you're talking with animals and communication. I had someone on. It's actually the title of the episode was "Dolphin Communication." There's a woman who's world renowned for studying how dolphins communicate, and they communicate in 4 different ways. They don't speak, but they have a different form of communication. You would be worth listening to, or it'd be really interesting putting you two together and letting you guys, two very smart people, talk to each other and keeping me out of the conversation.
Yeah, I know that. So I think one of the interesting questions about, I think what you were talking now about animals in the wild, because I know so I've read some time ago that dolphins might even have names for each other, and obviously they're also very intelligent species, and so obviously their communication system is probably well developed. But there were some so that just made me think about, we I don't know if we mentioned that before, that actually so since the 80s there was a huge interest in teaching language to different species, and actually
Mhm.
there are some reports of dolphins who are actually knowing a lot of who knew they were even able to understand some very simple syntax and knew some object words. But so what is very different in case of dogs from those dolphins and apes, certainly, who were also trained by for sign language or logographic communication, is that these dogs are not trained to do that. So they,
They just do it naturally.
yes, they do it naturally, and this is, I think, what is very interesting. And this is again about their motivation to communicate with us.
Well, one of the things that came out in the episode, and there's a really good IMAX movie about it as well, but on the dolphin thing is they communicate with each other, not necessarily communicating with us as much, but the way they communicate, they have their own sound, they have their own squeak or whatever they call it, but it's I will bet you that I need to put you two together is you guys will have some commonality, and actually it may make you think in different directions, I would think, given the fact you're both talking about communication.
Yes, yes, it would be interesting.
Yes, definitely.
So, you were talking about when the dog didn't understand anything, that it tended to go, you would see a bigger jump on the recording for the EEG.
Yes.
A bigger difference because they would recognize you could recognize like they're in their mind. I guess they're thinking, what the heck is that thing?
I mean, they notice the difference basically. So when we record EEG while dogs were watching, that the owner named the object, and
Hmm.
and then the named object was shown to the dogs, and this was done with more objects, not only with one object. Then that shows a certain type of brain activity or a certain type of brain wave, and we noticed that when we look at that brainwave, which we can see when the object doesn't match the name of the object what the owner said, then it looks different. Basically, there is a difference between the two. So actually, we just see that there is a brief different brain activity. So from which we can conclude that the dog's brain noticed the difference.
Well, and again, it's like I said earlier, when because I've never seen one live, but I've seen it on TV where they do the lie detector, and you can see how different how they react to different things. So,
Mm.
I guess it would be similar to that.
Mhm.
So, one of the things that I understood, so you're doing this study to see how dogs communicate, but there's a bigger picture here. Really, ultimately, is to understand how humans evolved to communicate with our complex communication skills, right?
Mm.
So again, I read this. So if this is incorrect, tell me. But you chose dogs because they're around people all the time, and they were domesticized, and they're around, and they're used to hearing communication and all that. There's an easier way to do that. But explain to me how learning that if dogs can comprehend doesn't mean that they're actually one of the things too. I know I'm all over the place now, so I'll settle down here. But one of the things I also read was it's not that they actually create speech. They're really learning these things for practical reasons.
Mhm.
So let's kind of define, the benefit of doing this study aside from, well, one is learning about dogs, but how that correlates with humans as well.
So yes, there are like two different pillars of our questions. Like one is, as you said, that we're trying to learn a little bit more about language evolution and about what is specific about humans and what type of what and when these special skills or capacities emerged in humans, and what could have been the factors that allowed us to start using language and speech. And then also there is this other thing that dogs live around us, and we can learn a bit more about their understanding of the world. But and of our human dog interactions. So for the first question, dogs are very good models to study language evolution, because what has been done before, and it has been a huge, a lot of studies has been done, comparative studies with apes
Right,
in the like, I think it started at the 70s, 80s, maybe already in the 60s, when a lot of scientists tried to train apes to use language, and they were like, well, obviously they will not speak, so they were like sign language attempts, and then logographic attempts, and so they were always limited. And then these excitement over teaching other species to communicate with us with language just went down, because there was obvious limitations in these animals as to what they can understand, or they can or how they can communicate. So a difference, well, an important difference between those language trained apes, and also there were dolphins, there was Alex the parrot, who was very famous, is that dogs are naturally living in the human environment.
right,
And this means also that they are naturally exposed to speech. So this is one factor. And another factor, even maybe more important, is that or we actually don't know, but so another factor is that they have been selected for human cooperation and human communication since they have been domesticated. And this is somewhere between
right.
18,000 to 30,000 years. And so this is like more around like 5,000 generations of dogs who has been specifically selected for human cooperation and communication. And so this makes the dogs an interesting model to see whether any of these two factors causes or affects their capacity to process language and speech differently. So this is why we are generally interested in how dogs are how dog brains, especially or specifically, are processing human communication.
Well, one of the things I've read a bunch of stuff on this stuff too, because immediately when you think about the dogs understanding and all that and communicating, Of course, you think about the apes, just like you said. And one of the things I read is that, like, if with apes, if you point at them, they won't pay attention to you. They actually have to be trained with pointing, whereas dogs pay attention right away, immediately. They actually pay more attention than the apes. And the apes had to be trained, where dogs are actually, again, learning in a different way, I guess is a better way of saying it.
Yes, so something obviously there are also limitations with dogs, but yes, so dogs naturally understand or follow human pointing, at least when this is like a clear pointing, with one hand and not complicating it,
Right.
also follow human gazing. And so this is something very important that has been actually claimed and established at the Department of Ethology at the Aalto University. So this department has pioneered studying social cognition with dogs. So for a very long time, dogs have been like excluded from scientific inquiry because these are, kind of artificial. It's an artificial species.
Hmm.
So whenever comparative science was, looking for species to test, like dogs were
Oh,
rather excluded. But actually, our department claimed for the first time that what used to be looked at as a disadvantage is actually an advantage of the dog. And so because of this common environment, dogs could have evolved some social skills that are paralleling human social skills. And so as such, like gaze following and pointing following are notable examples of that. And so this is one thing. And then another thing is that humans are relevant for dogs. So dogs rely on humans
right.
for their survival. And this is completely unique in the animal world, to rely on a human, like for a species in general, to rely on humans for their survivals. So what this is also reflected in what we see. Obviously there's a huge discussion about attachment and attachment like behaviors, but for the moment we are certain that at least in the animal world, dogs show, and dogs do have attachment to a human. So it's an interspecific, children are attached to their parents, so it's intraspecific, but dogs are attached to their human caregivers. And so there are many such social skills that have been demonstrated in dogs that are not present in other
Species.
species or haven't been yet demonstrated. And there is not really reason to be there because dogs have been selected for that and other species not really.
Oh, I never even thought about that. But another thing I read too, was how dogs will try really hard if you speak in a foreign language. Like, as an example, you go from English to Hungarian, so but they'll actually pay attention to a different language, trying to figure out what you're saying. More so than even like a baby, they don't really pay that much attention because they're used to hearing whatever the sounds they're hearing. But dogs will actually pay more attention to a different language, trying to figure out what you're saying.
Well, I don't know about that, but what we did show in this lab actually that they discriminate between languages for sure.
Yeah.
So we did an fMRI study, and actually children do as well. So already at birth, children can discriminate between their mother tongue and between rhythmically different languages. And then with time they can discriminate between languages from similar rhythm classes, but this require experience. And so what we did show using fMRI, that dogs could discriminate between Hungarian and Spanish.
Hmm.
So we played them. We put them in an MR scanner, and we played them excerpts from, like, little parts from the Little Prince in Spanish and Hungarian, and the pattern of their brain responses were different for the two languages.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah,
So, at the end of the day, and I'm sure you're still doing all these studies, what's your conclusion from all this?
Lila, and let you get this one.
Well, I just wanted to say earlier about this question of evolution and domestication that actually, of course, our study has the limitations
Okay.
in the sense that we show this what we call referential understanding in dogs, but we don't know, and we would need more studies also with other species to figure out whether these dogs show this ability or this type of understanding is because they developed so during domestication, or whether this is something which actually generally possible for other species as well. So we don't know those. So these are all open questions in this sense.
Well, one of the things that, and one of the reasons I even found out about you guys, once you guys published a study, it just exploded for you. It went everywhere. I mean, because everybody loves dogs, but I mean, it just was all over the news and everything about how there is some correlation with what dogs and being able to measure it scientifically is pretty incredible, I think.
Well, actually, we did not expect such a huge coverage, and I actually got responses from owners, like emails from owners, like, so why did you do an experiment for that? I could have told you the results, like I had to based on my dog.
Yeah,
But because seemingly dogs understand a lot. I mean, if you're a dog owner, I am a dog owner. I'm very critical of my dogs, but I see many dog owners who come to me and say, "Oh, my dog understands everything," and then I'm like, "Yeah, sure."
yeah,
But actually, this study is like putting my criticism at criticism, because they do seem to understand or process more that we believed before. But so generally, as I think we started that at the very beginning, that dogs are pretty good at following instructions. But that's not so trivial that they will learn the names of objects. So they are only, I think we didn't say this during this talk, that there are very few exceptional dogs who are, picking up on toy names very easily just during
right.
play. And so there are like only a handful around the globe that we know of. And so it wasn't even easy for this experiment to find dogs who would know enough object names. And so when Lliya did a study before with dogs, actually you can say this, I will not talk for you, where they found that in a lab setting, dogs are at chance when they have to choose between two toys that they are supposed to know the names.
Sorry, but on the yes, individually, but on the group level, you can actually see some indication that they can choose.
Yeah.
They can choose.
Yeah.
Well, and what you were talking about earlier too. There's in the news that dog that knew 1,000 different toys, the names of 1,000 different toys. That chaser or whatever that dog was that's out there. And talk a little bit about because it's in TikTok and all those things. Those with the buttons where the dogs can push and can talk, and that's they're just training them. Or are they actually? Did you work with any of the? Have you worked with any of those dogs to measure to see what they're saying too? Those. That deal. You know what I'm talking about.
The clever dogs.
Yeah, where they push the buttons and they can talk to you. Say, "Hey, so and so, Scott, can you tell me what this is?" "Oh yeah, here, boom, 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 boom," and it tells something. What is that? Is it more like more of a trick than it is a learned thing? What's your opinion on that?
I don't have experience with those dogs. Obviously, I've seen it. I followed Bunny for a while, and
Right,
so the thing is that with all those videos uploaded to TikTok, you never know what is not uploaded.
right.
So, but I think, and I know there is a research program in the US that is looking into it like more rigorously, and so we have to wait for the results. And
Hmm.
I don't want to dismiss it. I want to see those results, and then I'm happy to comment on it. But if this is working, then it's amazing. But yes, it has to be tested, in a controlled manner.
So basically, what we're saying here is we're just at the beginning of this thing. We're still going to learn more about all these things, but what we are finding is that they do more. They do know more than we actually gave them credit for.
Yes, or what they can show, basically. Yes.
Right. Exactly. Okay, so I know you guys, we've spent a lot of time talking. Matter of fact, the worst thing that could ever happen to you guys, if I come over to visit, you'll never leave because I'll be asking so many questions. We'll be talking forever. But I know that one of you now has an animal joke that is going to tell me an animal joke. So let's do that because I know we've covered everything. And then I can let you guys go hang out with the dogs instead of having this old dog on the phone with you.
Yes, so I have a dad joke with dogs, and I apologize in advance if I don't manage to say it funnily. But this is a joke that was told to me by one of my best friends' daughter, Millie, and so I will just repeat it.
Okay.
So it's like person talking to each other, and one says, "My dog doesn't have a nose," and then the other one says, "Okay, but then how does it smell?" The first one says, "Terribly." And so,
That's perfect. That's perfect. That's so me.
okay.
So me. I love it. I'm so glad you did it too. I mean, it's always hard to get people to do it because there's such silly jokes and nobody ever wants to say them.
Yeah.
But I think it just makes it more interesting. But thanks so much for being on. I know it was a nightmare for you guys. I mean, I know you've been inundated with requests and that, and being on here means a lot to me, and I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
Oh, it's more my pleasure. And for everybody out there listening, please keep listening, get more people to follow. But more importantly, I really, really appreciate you guys. And from the bottom of my heart, truly, for real.
For real, 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 for real.
We're supported by Let's Walk, that's here to love your animals like our own.
Austin, Houston, and Denver. Let's Walk is here to love your animals like our own. From daily walks, play, in-house sleepovers, and more. Go to work, out on the town, or take a vacation knowing your pets are in the best hands. This woman-owned small business does it all. Check us out on Instagram at Let's Walk Austin, Houston, and Denver.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.